I am so thrilled to have Morra Aarons-Mele in the studio with me today. Thank you for taking the time out to come and share your experience as a working woman, mom, and entrepreneur. And you help so many people. You have an amazing podcast that talks about being in the workplace and dealing with mental health issues. And you just have such a great message. So I'm tremendously honored that you're going to share your wisdom with us today. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you.
That's wonderful. So before we begin, would you mind just telling the viewers and listeners who you are and what you do, and tell us something that's not in your bio? You know, those little things that people love to hear, something extra.
Sure. So I live in Boston, right outside of Boston, in a lovely suburb. I have 3 children who are 5, 9, and 11. Spending a lot of time with them recently.
I can imagine.
And I have been working at home and for myself since 2006.
Wow.
So it's really funny because when coronavirus happened and everyone started freaking out about working at home, I was like, I've got this.
You got this.
I am an expert. I even wrote a book about, how to build a successful business when you work from home. 4 weeks in, I realized I can't do this. This is a nightmare because normally I have childcare. My kids go to school, we're all there. And so even I have been struggling with working from home, but I really do enjoy my little home empire. I'm an introvert. I really love to be alone. I call myself a hermit entrepreneur. So I truly have. I have a company called Women Online. We are a digital marketing company. We work with progressive entities, pro-women businesses, and we create digital campaigns. And we have about 10 people. We are all remote. We've never had an office, something I'm actually really proud of. And I have written a book called Hiding in the Bathroom, which is really about if you are an ambitious introvert who's also anxious, but you're really want a big career, how do you make that all work? We can talk about that.
I definitely love that. I love the title of the book, by the way. I think it's hilarious.
And I guess something that's not in my bio is that I have 14 pets.
Oh, wow.
I'm at heart, I'm just really an animal person. I much prefer animals to people. And so I have 9 chickens, 4 cats, and a puppy.
Oh, how lovely. I love that. I love the way you introduce yourself. You like your 14 pets more than people. That's so cute.
I do.
Give me a chicken any day, you say.
I love my hens.
Oh, that's so lovely. I love that. That's wonderful. I hope they're giving you eggs at the moment.
They are.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's just such a great intro. And just can we start right up the top off the bat with the fact that you're a mom working at home, thought you had it all together. And now suddenly you hit with, wow, those teachers are like gold and the childcare is like gold. And my kids are big. I've got 4, but they're in their 20s. But I have 2 at home with me now, quarantining here, the other 2 in New York and 2, the married ones, New York and Seattle. But it's true. You have to reorganize your life and everything. How did you do it? Because you're an introvert and you've been working at home and then it hit you.
And I'm big on boundaries, right? So I've always, one of the things that I've always been really good at is delegating tasks to other people and keeping my boundaries, So I had my life in such a lovely little rhythm because even though I'm an introvert, I own a consulting company, so I travel a lot. So I would, maybe fly sometimes once a week. I would be going to another city for a client or maybe a speaking event, something like that. And then of course that all stopped. So I'm at home more. My kids are at home. And it's just us. So I think the really difficult thing for me has been the feeling of not having a moment by myself. Even introverts who love their children need a break. You just
thank you.
Right,
yeah.
Your physical space is just non-existent, and I think that that's something that we've all really had to realize. Also, letting go of perfection. I've gained 12 pounds. I used to work out for an hour every day. I've gained 12 pounds. Now, these are first world problems. First class problems. I am very fortunate. Yeah. Although I think I had COVID and I was in bed for 15 days.
Oh my goodness.
Until recently I'm getting an antibody test, but my family has been healthy. We have work, but sort of letting go of what you feel like you should be doing and trying to readjust to a new normal of what your days are going to look like, what your work product's going to look like, what your exercise is going to look like, what dinner's going to look like, has also been really hard. And then the last thing I'll say, which is, I think, a universal experience, is the free-floating anxiety, right? I mean, the sense that disaster is only a second away. I think that many of us feel right now.
That hovering sense of what the unknown. And I was just speaking to this epidemiologist this morning, also from Boston, a Harvard geneticist. And he was just saying that is one of the, as scientists, we should be listening to scientists because they know what's going on, not the politicians. And even though they can't give you definite answers, at least it's more accurate. And I think a lot of that free-floating anxiety is coming from all these voices of opinions. It's layers and layers of opinions of facts that aren't actually facts yet because we don't really know.
Well, and then the anxious mind takes that. Mm-hmm. And, I think that especially if, so I always use the example of money. For me, money is a real topic of anxiety for me from my childhood. And so living in such economically uncertain times really sets me off. Yeah. Other people might be set off by other issues, but, your anxiety can just kind of glom on to something that's out there and take you in places that are kind of crazy.
I agree. And then how do you manage that? Because I know you've also, you talk about in your podcast and your book about the fact that you've battled with social anxiety for as long as you can remember. And how normal it actually is, but it can be on extreme. And I say normal, the way I always explain it as a clinician and researcher is, we've got that scale and I say it's all normal, but we can sometimes be an outlier. We can slip to the outlier regions of the bell curve. And that happens with various different things. I think a lot of us are we've slipped out of the bell curve at the moment and we're sitting on those edges. So how have you dealt with that and cope with anxiety?
Well, in my life, I think like many people who have clinically diagnosed anxiety, and I have clinically diagnosed depression, it ebbs and flows, right? So you may have several years where you're doing great, and then you may just get hit with kind of like an anxiety bomb, that may be triggered by something that happened in your life. Who knows? I had that happen this fall, actually, before the pandemic, where I just went through about 6 weeks where, I had a panic attack. I was, I called the ambulance once, even though I'm no stranger to panic attacks. I really thought I was dying. Called the ambulance, went to the ER, just overwhelming panic. And about 6 weeks it lasted. And it was really a wake up call because it had been several years since I had been in such a bad state. When you wake up every morning and anxiety is just your whole life.
Consuming
you can't eat, you can't breathe. My chest is tightening just even thinking about it.
Yeah, the reaction.
And then I sort of worked through it. I did a lot of intense therapy. I started, doing a lot more breathing and mindfulness work. And it sort of floated away. And with the pandemic, what's really interesting is that I think myself and a lot of other anxious people, we've sort of met our moment. It's like what you've been preparing for. A lot of us who are sort of defensive pessimists, actually, that's the clinical term for it, right? We build in pessimism as a defense mechanism to get us through. And when something like this happens, you think, see, it's true. And then you sort of almost feel a weight lifted. Like, oh, I can deal with this. This is what I've been preparing for. I've planned for this. And so it's actually been really interesting because I think that compared to some of my friends who have not had acute anxiety in the past, I feel more comfortable in a weird way. Like I'm sleeping okay. I'm not sleepless. I'm mostly managing it. Unless, that moment when you get caught by a really scary story on the news, or you see a friend is very ill. But it's been really interesting.
Well, that's what you've just said is very significant about your higher level of anxiety throughout your life has almost prepared you for this time. So you're coping better. Do you find that you're reaching out and helping your friends that maybe weren't as anxious perhaps as what you were before? So you now like this little solid brick that, how are you coping? What are you doing? Are you finding that you're doing that?
A little bit more. I mean, I feel one of the things that I've been trying to do is help friends whose income has been cut because I work in my day job. I work with a lot of mostly women, freelance writers, content creators, online influencers, marketing people, who've been really hit hard. And I think that one of the things that I can do now is be expansive and generous with giving them freelance work, with trying to find jobs. That's something that I feel centered in right now. So I've been trying to do more of that.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. There's a study that shows that when you're in a place of anxiety or depression, a bad place, that if you reach out and help others, you increase your own ability to cope by a factor of 68%. So
68%.
I know, and more. And they think that's like sort of the minimum. And there's a lot more. There's a ton of work being done around that now. And it incorporates things like, gratitude, whatever. But it's actually when you're in that place where you feel like you can't get out of bed, or you are like, this is triggered by the financial. It's so interesting because as I listened to you, I thought, wow, you're actually doing that because you said your trigger is the financial. And yet so you're actually coping with that by literally helping others make money. And, so that's beautiful.
Honestly, I think that I call them small, meaningful actions.
Yeah.
And a great example, listeners, if you are having that feeling, imagine you're trying to work, right? You're working and you see a very scary news alert or something on Twitter and you're frozen.
Yeah.
To take that small, meaningful action. And something that I do, and this sounds really silly, but it's really powerful, is I go on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I look at what people in my LinkedIn feed are doing, and I give them a like, or I'll write a job endorsement, or try to do something that gets me out of my own head and my own stewing. And, you could do it in any way. You could go give a neighbor a meal or text someone and see how they're doing. It can be something super, super small, but it's enforcing that altruism and getting you out of your own stew, right?
Yes.
You're out of your rumination and the world is ending. I cannot possibly lead this Zoom call because the world is ending and we're all going to die.
Yeah.
And it really just snaps you out of your head.
You've actually just described something that is so practical and so scientific. I've just finished a set of clinical trials where I do the clinical trials where I work on mind-brain connection. I've been doing this for 38 years now in this field, and we showed when people get their mind managed, so when you're in that panic attack mode or in that set and you actually grab your mind like you did, you captured your thoughts and you transferred that into an action, you can actually see that shift in your brain. So you can actually automatically on the unconscious level, which is the biggest part of us, instinctively on unconscious levels where the altruism exists, where all the values that make us human and that drive how we function. And when we draw on those, we improve brain function and we increase our own resilience. And you've just described the practical side, and I've given you the science behind it.
And where
in
your brain is this all happening, Dr. Leaf?
Basically, across the whole brain is involved in different parts. So you have the big. We get people tend to get stuck in structure because we've become such a reductionistic society. So they think it's an amygdala. And there's been over talk about that. So I move away from that because your brain is not you. Your mind and brain are separate. So your brain is responding. So when you are activating altruism in the way that you've described to manage a momentary almost frozen anxiety moment because of some sort of trigger, you activate a flow of initially theta energy in the brain, which is a wave that is very healing. And that activates another wave called alpha. Now, none of them switch off. You've got different waves, but the strength of theta will increase, which will then increase alpha. Now, when that combination happens, you start digging very deep down inside of yourself and you start pulling on those values to help others even more. And then as you do it, the feedback that you get then increases what we call gamma waves to the brain, and then that enables you to learn. So that whole process will involve the whole brain. If you're conscious and awake, you're going to have a lot of activity in the frontal lobe, you're going to have memories coming up, so you'll have activity over the temporal lobe. But it's not one structure that's doing it. It is our mind that is actually making the brain respond. So we see waves like waves in the sea. It's more waves of energy, and those waves move through different structures. But there's an optimized function and a non-optimized function. What you described was a very optimized function. And so you found a
good for me.
Yeah, good for you. And the reason I'm harping on this is because we get so many questions about how to get out of an anxiety or frozen moment. So let's bring this into the workplace now. So now you say you fly around. I know you've got a great podcast that talks about anxiety in the workplace. Can you tell us a little bit about your podcast first, and then can we launch from there a little bit into dealing with anxiety and mental health issues in the workplace? Because I know that's really a big area of your focus.
Yes, it is. And my podcast is called The Anxious Achiever. It's from Harvard Business Review. We were just honored for a Webby. We're a Webby Award honoree.
And it's really good.
I'm very, which makes me really pleased. And
congratulations. It's a great podcast.
My point of view is that anxiety is normal, and we cannot divorce our anxiety from our leadership at work or in life. I think that, again, societal stigma, societal teaching, whatever you want to call it, we have a very fixed version of what leadership is, certainly in Western society and kind of success culture, in business culture. And that leader does not suffer anxiety because we see anxiety as weakness. And we can't imagine a leader having a moment of weakness, right? Leadership is about strength. And I just sort of say, to heck with all that. That's wrong. And actually, good leaders, and there's a lot of research about this, good leaders are empathetic. Good leaders are human. Good leaders listen. Good leaders are sometimes vulnerable. And yet, with their vulnerability, they have competence, right? Amy Cuddy has done a lot of research on this. They are empathetic, they are vulnerable, they're warm, but they're also competent. And so my whole theory is, if you are someone who carries anxiety with you more than other people, that you need to acknowledge that, understand it, understand how it makes you feel, react, how it changes your work, manage it, and turn it into a source of kind of essential humanness.
That's a great way of explaining it.
That there's no shame. It's whatever. I'm anxious. That person has a broken leg. I'm really anxious today. No biggie. I'm still the competent, amazing leader that you've always known. And so I do a lot of writing and work about anxiety and leadership. And on my podcast, we talk to leaders who are open about their anxiety disorders. But of course, we also bring in depression. I'm really excited. We're going to do a show soon about a CEO who built a really big company who had ADHD, who grew up being told he was stupid and always thought he was stupid and just carried this weight of his learning difference with him. I really like to make these conversations light and funny and human, because I want it to feel normal.
That's so good. And I love that, because these are all fields that I've worked in, and I have been on a mission for 38 years to help people to understand the normalcy of anxiety and depression and ADD and ADHD, which are actually not illnesses. They're not its. They're actually just descriptions of a big umbrella description of a bunch of stuff, because you can't say you're just depressed. There's a reason for it. So when you said there that you've got to acknowledge and find and understand it, you're saying the same thing, actually, if you think of it, because yes, there may be the label of depression, but the way it's described in today's, and I think this is why it affects leadership. I actually want to ask you this. This is how I understand in my mind, and I want to ask you if this is how you're seeing it in the workplace. You said something about the fact that leadership, if you say you're depressed or anxious, then it's seen as a sign of weakness. Meanwhile, depression and anxiety is a sign of humanity. You also said that. And from the research, that's actually the truth, because every human, in order to be a growing human, has to experience the discomfort of anxiety and depression, because it's really you going through something that's going to change you. And it's experiences, and you've got to be able to be comfortable embracing that. And I always talk about embrace, process, and reconceptualize. So the techniques that I've developed have been based on those principles and how you can change your brain with that neuroplasticity with your mind and so on. So my question to you is that, do people, with all that, what I've just said now, do leaders that when you talk to leaders, when you explain this to people and that anxiety is normal, does it shift how they see themselves? Does it shift how they manage what they're doing? Does it shift how they impact their staff?
I don't know, because I'm not in the workplace with them. That's not what I do in my day job. I just talk to people, and I'm about to start writing a book about it, but I don't coach. I don't sort of sit in the workplace. I do think that things are changing in terms of mental health. And I think, again, coming back to this moment, that if you're not anxious right now, you have a serious personality disorder. I can't imagine showing up every day as a leader of any size business, whether you have a small business like I do, or you're the CEO of a huge company, and not looking at your staff and saying, this is hard. I'm feeling anxious. The difference, and where it turns into leadership, is understanding that you can say, I'm anxious, but I'm not going to be a mess about it.
That's so good.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm anxious today, but I'm still going to hold you. I can't promise you that things are going to be great. I can't promise you that you're going to have a job in 6 months. I can't do that. I don't have a crystal ball, but I can create an environment for us together to feel held and figure out what we can. That's leadership. I think what we're so used to, or what our stereotype is, either a leader who's anxious and a mess, and so we feel scared as their team, or I think what's more real is leaders, people who are so out of touch with their emotions that they're mean and nasty and doing crazy things because they can't feel that they're anxious.
That would make anyone that they're leading incredibly anxious because they'd pick up on that because it's so against how we...
Right. I mean, Daniel Goleman calls it emotional Wi-Fi. And I always think about that, right? We've all had the experience with a boss who's been nasty to us and snapped at us. And we think we're getting fired. Yes. And then we learn it's because the boss, their toddler was up all night, or they're having a personal issue, or they're in a bad mood, right? It's that writ large.
Exactly.
It would be much better if the boss could say, God, I didn't sleep last night. I'm really tired.
That's true.
Crummy mood.
That's true. And when are we going to start allowing that? Because this whole image of the leader being this perfect person, you see it everywhere. I mean, whatever culture, whether it's a church culture, school, corporate, it's always, if you're the leader, you just got to have it all together. No one has it all together. But together we can kind of still muddle through, can't we? It's that honesty and vulnerability that I'm hearing you say is critical.
Right. And it's emotional intelligence, ultimately. I mean, it's, it's nothing new under the sun, but I think it's really important, and maybe now can be a learning moment.
I think so, because as this epidemiologist I was telling you, a couple of them that I've interviewed, they've said for the first time, humanity is facing a global enemy, all of humanity. So we've really got to shift how we do everything. So it's a great opportunity, isn't it, for us to shift everything, including leadership in the workplace and managing mental health in the workplace. That brings me to another topic that you cover, and that is, how do you address, as a person in the workplace, so you're not the leader, you're the employee, but you're battling with mental health and you've got this boss who just acts like they're perfect, but meanwhile we've just spoken about that's not really the case. But it's not really allowed to be spoken about as much. It's getting better. I mean, it's definitely better. There's more awareness and there's more mindfulness training and more breathing and meditation, although that's not quite enough to sustain either. We have to also embrace the reality and process. And I love what you said earlier on about, work. I'm in a mess today because my toddler didn't sleep or whatever, but together somehow we'll get through the day. We'll still. So for the employee who's in a situation where it's very stigmatized still, and if they go and say, I've got anxiety, they're going to potentially lose their job or something. How do you deal with that? What would your advice be?
I mean, this is what I hear all the time, right? Is a person who feels that they're stuck in a workplace that doesn't understand them and won't respond kindly to what they need. And this doesn't even have to be anxiety. This could be, really, before the pandemic, what I would always hear was, I really would love a day to work from home every week, so I don't have to sit in traffic. So I don't have to, I need to write a report. My office is so loud. I sit in an open plan office. I can't get anything done, but my boss wants to see my face. So what it all comes down to is being able to ask for what you need to do your best work. And it may not be that you can ask your boss for that. You may have to go to HR. You may have to go to another leader in the organization. If you are having a serious mental health crisis, I think it's actually really important that you do tell somebody. And this could be, confiding in a friend who's a colleague who's at your level. It could be going to HR. It could be investigating if your company has an EAP or what services your company has. If you work in a small business, it's different, right? Because the relationships tend to be much more intimate. And then I think it's really about coming up with a plan, right? Because this is still your manager, and you also don't necessarily want them to see the mess, right? So it's about saying, I'm having a really hard time right now. Here's what I need, and here's how I'll get the work done.
That's
assuming that
great.
You're not in huge crisis. If you're having a terrible clinical depression, please get professional help. But if you're having anxiety every day at work and you need to go take a walk, or you need to leave for therapy, if you're managing your anxiety in terms of your life, think about a way to ask for what you need. And you don't need to overshare. You are not responsible for telling your boss everything. What you
I like
need,
that.
Right? You don't have to. we often think, and I used to see this a lot.
That's really important. Don't overshare.
It's really true because, back in the day when we didn't talk about being pregnant at work, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which,
gosh.
Right. Women would feel like they,
had to hide.
Right. Or if they needed to leave for childcare, they'd have to overshare to their boss. Oh, because I'm feeling really guilty and it's their 4th grade play and I have missed their last 6 plays and da. No one cares. No one needs to hear that. I need to leave at 3. I need to go. I need to take this time, but don't worry. Here's how I'm going to make it up. And you have my cell phone. You can always text me.
That is brilliant. It's taking control in a very calm way. It's not justifying, because as soon as you go in with a guilty, I'm going to justify, it immediately creates a defense. It's almost like there's going to be some sort of friction in some way, and everyone's going to leave feeling bad. If you go in calmly like you've just done now, like you just modeled, that was just amazing. The way you modeled that, people need to freeze frame that. Just go in. Well, and if you're a
shift worker, right? So if you work the front desk and if you leave, there's going to be a real problem. That's a different thing. You might have to say, but Alicia's going to cover my shift.
Yeah.
I've got it. I think the message that I want to share is if you are not in a total crisis, but you are experiencing, mental distress that you need to take care of, you are absolutely allowed to ask for what you need, but you also should think about a solution.
So you don't just go in there anxious, bunch of information, talking all these things, justifying.
Dump it all, hand them the rock.
All, and then give them, in South Africa, we would call that a gorilla. Put the gorilla in your lap and now you go to solve that. You go in calm, collected, well, you may be crying,
as much
whatever.
As
you can, and just say, look, there is a situation, I have to handle it, but here's my plan. That's the key, isn't it? It's to actually not overshare and to offer them a plan of action. And then that way so if we can get employees can do that, and if the leaders can be more open and vulnerable about how you open dialogue, don't you? You create an environment of open dialogue.
It's human, but competent. You know what I mean?
Love that. Human, but competent. That's brilliant. What I saw just when you said that, it just triggered one of the findings we found in my most recent clinical trial is that when you manage your mind, and what you've just described, being human, but competent, is a mind management skill. You can reduce anxiety and depression by 80%, like literally in the moment, and you can keep it. So mind management keeps anxiety and depression. You're still going to manage, but you can actually control it and drop it down to drop it down about 80%. And you can create an upward trend over time as you learn and become much more skilled at dealing with those incidents. So those triggers, because you recognize them quicker and you manage them quicker, but you can get. So science shows that this is not the techniques that you're telling and guiding are not just these one-off nice to have. Oh, well, it won't work for me. Going in with that attitude, it's not going to work. But going with the attitude that maybe the first time your boss is a bit weird, but you know what? You produce the work. So next time it happens, they don't have a leg to stand on because you delivered. Exactly. And then you get more skilled at being able to handle that. But don't you think women, Maura, I wanted to ask you, women go into these situations with a lot more guilt than men?
We do. And it's funny. And I wrote about this in my first book. I grew up working in digital technology in New York City in the 90s. And most of the sales guys were guys. And no one ever knew where they were.
Yeah.
Honestly, right? They were never at their desks. They would come in, saunter in at 10 in the morning, whatever. No one knew where they were. But as long as they delivered their numbers,
no one questioned.
Their bosses never cared. They didn't ask for permission. And I always thought about that. And I thought about, gosh, wouldn't it be awesome to get to a point where I didn't have to ask for permission, where I could manage my workday to get what I need, but also because I'm getting what I need, I'll be good at my work. And I think if you come from it with that flipped mindset, which is a kind of privileged white male mindset.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm so good. I can control my time and take what I need, because I'm definitely going to give you what you need. And so I think that it's a hard leap for a lot of us, especially when you're younger in your career, if you're just starting out. And women, of course, we're not trained to assert what we need, but you can practice it and really understand that giving yourself what you need will help you be better at your job.
I love what you're saying. You triggering some situations that I had with being a scientist in a male-dominated science world. And, they kind of, a scientist they're supposed to look like something if you're a woman. I'm not quite sure. But it would be, my husband and I would go to conferences and they'd go up to my husband and say, "Hi, Dr. Leaf." Automatically assume in a hotel, he answers the phone, "Hello, Dr. Leaf. Hello, Mrs. Leaf." And so my husband would always say, "No, she's the doctor. I'm the experiment. I'm the experiment." That's his standard answer, which works very well. But I've had come head to head with scientists where I'm saying something that is very valuable, but there's a male next to me who's talking nonsense. But because it's a male scientist, I've had to so I learned very early on to be very assertive and to have confidence in my content. It's worked. And so when I see that coming out, I will confront it immediately in a very nice way. But so when you're saying that, but it's a skill I had to learn. And I learned it very, very early on in my career. Otherwise, you will just get flattened. And it's a relevant skill.
And sometimes I'm curious to your thoughts, though, because I do think that sometimes women get cut down for it. When you ask for too much, you may get cut down. People don't want to hear it. And they don't like women being assertive. And so I'm curious if you learned ways to either say, this isn't a person who's ever going to get it, I'm not even going to try, or if you learned ways to sort of position your ask in a more palatable way.
So, that's a brilliant question. If I think of it, I'm thinking of a couple of people in my head that they really, because I was running ahead of TV. This was another scientist, equally as competent, delivered as much research, have as strong a theory. So there's no, we all scientists are delivering something. But this particular person, because I happened to be a host of a TV show at that point, was very, "Oh, you're just a TV show host." I said, "No, I'm not." And what I had to do, and he was very aggressive, and he's a great scientist and tremendously knowledgeable, but I am too. I have confidence so I had to make sure that I dug into not my emotions there, but I dug into my knowledge base. And I just challenged back I didn't fight. I refused to fight with him, but I will stand up. And they may think I'm sweet and whatever, but I will come head on with statements and confront. And then at some point, if they choose to carry on, I'll just walk away, because there's a point at which but then my parting statement would always be something very, very scientific that I knew would be something that they couldn't answer back. So it would be and it done very nicely kind of to sort of wrap the bow. Say, "Listen, we can agree to disagree. This is my field," something like that. And my heart was fluttering. You're going through stress. It's quite difficult but you have to stand your ground, because the next woman that he tries to dominate, he's going to have the memory of me in the back of his head, and hopefully won't be the case, because that was a particularly bad male-dominated patriarchal type of situation. But it happens a lot. It happens a lot. And my advice to women also is have confidence in who you are and what you deliver, and don't and find some sort of statement that you can fall back on that is powerful, that is unique to you, that you can kind of end a conversation with. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's sort of how I handle it.
I totally agree.
Yeah, and it's not, and most of the time, I find that it's most of the time, if I just come in, I'm on your level. I don't ever. There's certain people that there's this hierarchy automatically in life, isn't there? Or that people, that person's richer or more of a celebrity or has more followers or is the CEO. So there's almost like this, I've got to suck up to them or I've got to talk in a certain way. I never do that. I respect and honor every person for who they are, but so I will go and talk to a leader as though they're my equal. Although I was not dishonoring, I'm honoring and respecting, but I'm not going to go and drop myself down to make them feel better. Does that make sense? And that's kind of how I've handled that sort of situation.
No, I think that's brilliant. I mean, I'm less that way just because I'm socially anxious. So my tactic is to probably listen more and not assert myself, just because I tend to blurt things out, and if I get too anxious, so I've learned that I can be my best actually just by listening and asking questions. But
that's brilliant. So it's
a great strategy.
Yeah, so that's how you've handled your social anxiety is through listening. Because when you listen, you look, because I can see how you do that. You're very direct, and then you ask questions.
I learned it the hard way.
Brilliant.
I didn't learn it till my mid-30s. Okay. So it took me many years of either drinking too much at parties or frankly, like blurting and just being kind of weird until I realized that, the best way for me to get through a social situation that scares me is to, as my friend Lisa Stone says, pretend I'm Oprah.
I love that.
And sort of be connected and curious about a person, and who doesn't like to talk about themselves.
That is so good. So that's how you manage your social anxieties, is listen and ask questions. I love it. I think that's fantastic because people, as you say, people love to talk about themselves.
They love it.
Yeah, and you can swing one question to the next, and you can kind of guide a person, can't you? Which is amazing.
Yeah.
Well, you do it very well in your podcast. I must say, you ask really great questions. So it's fantastic. I've got a few more questions here. So what advice do you have for leaders on how to manage anxiety and burnout?
It's funny. I had a guest on my show who's a pastor. His name is Steve Cuss, and I really, really recommend his work. I'm not religious. I'm not Christian, but he has a podcast called Managing Leadership Anxiety, and he has a book of the same name, and it is fabulous. His whole position on burnout is that burnout is not about the workload. It's about the anxiety and stress that we put around managing and delivering the work.
Very good. I agree with that.
I sort of do too. I mean, there are always
times. That's your perception around it. Yeah.
Exactly. There's always times when we, it's that end of term feeling, right?
Yes,
that oh my gosh, how am I going to get this done?
Deadline, yeah.
That's not burnout. Mm-mm. Burnout is emotional and even physical. Mm-hmm. And I do think that burnout, if you're feeling that burnout, it's a really good time to check in with your feelings about your work, how you're treated at your work, your boss, your team, where you are in your life, everything, because that feeling of, I can't do it. I'm so tired. I can't focus. I hate this. Or, who cares? This is all stupid. I mean, burnout manifests in different ways, is really signaling something to you that's valuable. Because if you love your work and you're in a good place and you get into flow, you're psyched, right?
Exactly.
And then you take a break.
Yes, there you go. I think a lot of people just don't take breaks, but that's so true. If you love what you're doing, I'm so glad that you distinguish between burnout and between having a deadline. Because we've all got deadlines, and deadlines are just inevitable when it comes to life. And I think people mix those two, don't they? And people aren't having...
Absolutely. And I think that, it's funny, I was reading an article about the Department of Health and Human Services and how they're fried. They're at the end of their ropes. They've been sprinting for 100 days. And that it was sort of a mix of, oh my gosh, we're in a pandemic, but also they're in a very difficult management situation where they're getting pulled between so many different factors. And the reporter was kind of acknowledging what we've just been talking about, that yes, they're in a pandemic and they're working so hard. And of course they're exhausted, but they're also frustrated because they're scientists who can't do their work, or they're fighting between political and career appointees and all this kind of stuff. So burnout is never a simple question. And if you're feeling like you've been working 18 hours a day for 5 years, but you're not in a life-saving job, that's really also a time to be like, why?
Why am I doing it? Yes. And how am
I have friends who work in marketing, and they're like, I work 14 hours a day and I work all weekend. And I'm like,
why?
I love you dearly and you're very smart, but you're not on the front lines, dear.
No, you're not an ER physician. Yeah.
You're selling soap. Why are you doing this? Right?
Exactly.
So, it's always a moment of inquiry is, I guess, my point.
That is outstanding. So if you catch yourself saying, I'm burnt out, you need to follow that with why.
Yeah.
Which will then lead to, I'm spending 18 hours a day selling soap. Something's wrong.
Or, God, I'm commuting 2.5 hours a day on top of a very demanding job. If there were 2 days a week that I couldn't commute, how would I feel?
Brilliant.
Literally, how would I feel? Things like that. Because I'm not saying you may love your job marketing. I'm not saying go find another job. I'm saying what
do it
can
differently.
You fix?
Yeah, do it differently. So now that brings me to a question with the current COVID crisis. Aren't people being forced to do just that?
To ask these questions.
Yeah, because they've had to do their jobs differently. And I know that there has been research showing that people are spending on average 3 hours longer working because of the fact that you've got kids, you've got to homeschool suddenly, as you said in the beginning. So, but those are, other factors. But your creativity has, I think people's creativity can soar in a challenge like this, because our brain responds to challenges and our minds respond to challenges.
I think your creativity can soar, but I think also your creativity can be totally drained by the anxiety and the uncertainty.
Exactly. So it's to balance them.
I mean, I don't know about, I've totally felt just drained during this. For me, just if I accomplish the basic tasks every day, it's a win at some point when I'm feeling sad or worried or anxious or my kids are driving me crazy. So I think I don't want people to blame themselves if they're not using this moment as a moment of generation. But yeah, I mean, I guess the question is, though, you have to have a level of economic certainty to begin to question these things. And so a lot of people don't right now. It's really hard.
So it's very hard for them. But in terms of those making the plans that that's a discussion that's absolutely valid, that it's very hard if you don't know where you're going to find money for the next meal. That's a whole different ballgame.
But not even that. I think even if you feel like, God, my retirement savings are diminished, or gosh, I was really, my small business, I've talked about this a ton. Like, we were going to have a great year. I was making a lot of plans.
Yeah.
That number has been cut at least in half.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So it's even, and I mean, I can put food on the table, but
yeah, I get it.
You also have to acknowledge the grief and the anxiety and the anger you're feeling about what's happened. And then, if you're in an okay place about that, then you can step back and say, but are there things, my husband said to me the other day, and he used to travel more than me. He said, I never want to get on a plane. I've realized this. I don't want to do it anymore.
I get that. I travel
unless I have to.
No, I get that. I travel 70% of the month, and it's been a pleasure not getting on a plane or being in a hotel. So I can get that. It's also, our business has changed completely. We're literally having to rethink how we do everything. And that's what brings us back a few circles back to the statement you made earlier on, that in the workplace, the soap salesman, that you're coming back to that example, we have to look at, if I'm spending 2.5 hours commuting, how can I do that differently? So that kind of thinking, how can I replan and reorganize? Does that apply? Now's the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And wow, I'm doing all this work late at night, and I'm really productive late at night. But at 2:00 in the afternoon, I just want to take a nap.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. I don't know about you. I always get tired at 4. I'm always useless at 4.
Me too. That's like the worst time of the day for me. But like at 12:00 at night, I'll write my books or work from 12 to 4 in the morning.
Exactly.
So it's to find those patterns.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good moment to have inquiry.
Yeah, a good moment of inquiry. I love that. You wrote a book called Hiding in the Bathroom. Let's talk about your book. And now you have referenced quite a lot of the concepts already. So it's called Hiding in the Bathroom, How to Get Out There When You'd Rather Stay In. Can you talk about what inspired you to write this book and what it's really about? And
I mean, it's really a book about how to build your career and your business when you're an anxious introvert, which luckily, thanks to technology, is really possible, right? Which is another thing in this moment. One of the things that I learned many years ago is that I am a great online networker. I'm actually a really good networker. I'm not a good networker in the kind of old school sense of going to lots of events and belonging to a lot of clubs and, schmoozing and taking people out to dinner. I'm terrible at that.
Yeah.
But I'm really good on LinkedIn. I'm really good at connecting people creatively via email. And that's amazing. And so what I wanted to do with the book was just offer really practical tips for people who, again, may not see themselves in the leader with a capital L that many of us have come up with.
The traditional way. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, it's been such a gift to do that book and speak with so many people around the country for the past few years. But what came out of that is the fact that I've really focused on anxiety and leadership, because when I would go give talks and talk to people, I would talk about anxiety, but the book was sort of framed as if you're an introvert, and people would always want to talk about anxiety. And that was the part that they'd really feel needing resources and needing to meet someone who was so open about their anxiety and yet, sort of successful anyway. And so I had this sort of mind shift a couple of years ago where I thought, anxiety is my passion. Weird, but
fantastic. You've turned it around. You've channeled it into what you do. So you've said the book's got tips on how to take anxiety and make it work for you.
Yeah, how to take things that can be seen as weaknesses, whether it's social anxiety, whether it's generalized anxiety, whether it's just, being kind of a shy introvert, whatever, and really turning that into your strength. Again, I come back to the empathetic, honest, but competent leader.
Yes.
And how can you channel your natural personality into being a salesperson? How can you channel your natural personality into being a great negotiator, into being an entrepreneur. We never think of entrepreneurs unless they're, genius coders like Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, who are famously shy kind of introverts.
Yeah.
You don't think of entrepreneurs as being the kind of people who would rather hide in their home office. But yet you absolutely can be an entrepreneur and hide in your home office. You just have to have a strategy.
Could you give an example? Even though you've given one of yourself, you've used yourself, if you can take that a little bit further with how you've done it, or give another example maybe of someone who's fed back to you, you've given a talk to, or you've given us some strategies and tips in terms of how to actually utilize your anxiety as a strength.
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple ways. One of my favorite ones is to use that sort of attunement. If you're socially anxious, you are very attuned to other people, right, around you. You are constantly monitoring how they're reacting to you. What are people in the room feeling? Now, you may be interpreting it in the frame of, they all hate me, I'm terrible, I don't deserve to be here. But if you can learn to understand, that's just my social anxiety talking. I deserve to be here. I'm good. I'm prepared. I'm ready to go. You can actually use all those tune-in skills to facilitate amazing conversation, to really understand, if you're in a sales situation, what that customer needs, the problem that they need solved. You don't need to talk at them and prove to them that you're the smartest person in the room. You can draw them out and hear the problem that they need solved, because you're empathetic, because you have good radar, because you ask questions, and offer them a solution. And that, to me, that's the kind of salesmanship I want to do. I don't want to go show off in a room of people. And I sell for my business. And so I think it's really about taking those skills that you have as the person you are, caring for people. If we talked about getting people jobs, but I realize that for me, connecting people is something that I really love to do. It's really helpful trying to find people jobs, but it helps me with my anxiety, because my anxiety comes very much from having a scarcity mindset, that I'm going to run out of money, that I'm going to be a failure, that no one loves me, that it's all going to be taken away from me. And if I can give to other people and convince myself that there's more pie for everybody, that I'm not going to run out of pie, I feel better. But I've also created this amazing network of people who, we have social capital. They'll help me along the way. We help each other. And so it's that radical inquiry. Jerry Colonna, who I adore, calls it radical self-inquiry, that can really lead to you doing your work in an authentic and powerful way, not trying to be someone you're not.
You said that so well. You really, I feel like I need to clap for that.
That's lovely. I do believe it.
No, it's beautiful.
But I want to leave this. This is the most practical thing. And if you are an introvert, or you're stuck working at home and you're not an introvert, and you're worried about your future prospects, your career, there's something that I call the 10 touches rule. And I stole this from my husband. There's a million versions of this, but every week you're going to reach out to 10 people, either in your network or who you'd like to be in your network, somehow. It could be liking their article on LinkedIn. It could be retweeting them. It could be emailing a client that you haven't spoken to for a while and just checking in. It could be, someone who's a colleague who you're friends with on Facebook who has a cute baby, telling them what a cute baby it is. These do not have to be big huge interactions. But the sheer act of being front of mind or front of algorithm, in our digital age, really expands your network, keeps you in people's minds. And it's the kind of thing that you can do from behind your screen, so it doesn't involve things that are going to make you anxious. So 10 times a week. And in normal times, I would say try to have, coffee or lunch or something in person with someone, but
that would be
we can't do that now.
Post-COVID. That is brilliant. That's two. Once again, I'll give, clap for that one too. That's just, it's so doable and so real.
Doable.
So doable. And it does so much good stuff for your brain and your body, and feeds back into your mental space too. So you've been amazing. I have loved this conversation. I've learned so much, and thank you for taking the time. And I'll leave you to go back to your kids and let them drive you crazy now.
Play-Doh. It's all about the Play-Doh.
Play-Doh. And then you come out of your office and you actually want some space, but now you've been in your office working, they want to play, don't they? They want attention. You're thinking, hey, I need my space first. Can I go play on my own first?
No. Well, thank you so much. Be well.
Thank you. You too. Thank you so much. It's been great. Oh, by the way, just one more thing. How can people find out more about you?
Well, they can go to hidinginthebathroom.com or follow me on Twitter. I'm at Morra AM, MORRAAM.
Wonderful. We'll put that in the show notes. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful day. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.